And Buddhism, they believe that desire leads to suffering. In other words, if you have unmet desires, you will suffer. And that's the cause of all suffering. So therefore, you must get rid of desire to get rid of suffering. But then what happens? You have a desire to get rid of desires, and it contradicts. It's not really livable. You cannot actually live in a way in which you have no desires, because no matter what way you look at it, you're going to have a desire because you desire to have no desires. Now, I'm going to stop saying desires, but you guys get the point. It's not a livable worldview. Therefore, it's not a valid worldview. We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to the Garrison. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Garrison, and today we are on part 2 of our discussion about worldviews, which leads me on to say, if you haven't already watched part 1, that is a great idea, because it's going to make this episode make a whole lot more sense. So as a wee bit of a recap on what we talked about in part 1, we talked about what a worldview actually is, and that it's a way of viewing reality. And we talked about what each of the umbrella worldviews, which were theism, naturalism, and transcendentalism, were, and what they believe when it comes to topics such as origins and identity, morality, and purpose. I also want to say, before we get into the meat of today's discussion, that if you've noticed on recent Garrison podcasts that there's been like a little edit or a little cut in between me talking, that's because the current studio that I'm in is quite warm because we're getting into summertime. Now, recently I tried a new technology where I put my camera in the fridge to cool it down before we are recording, but I'm really grateful today is not one of those super hot days, but I'm going to try to record as many as I can in the colder days. Of course, this doesn't affect your listening at all. I don't know why I'm talking about it, so let's get into it. In this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to evaluate a worldview. How do we make judgments about whether a worldview is valid or not, whether they match up with the way things really are or not? We're also going to narrow down again and look at more specific worldviews within the umbrella of theism and naturalism and transcendentalism. Okay, so in the last episode, you may remember I talked about a bagel, which I ate, which had avocado on it, and the avocado kept falling through the hole, and how a worldview is that little part that fills the bagel and turns it into a burger bun. Or maybe more specifically, we talked about a giant puzzle piece, a triangular puzzle piece, right? And this middle triangle, which fits the bigger triangle piece, is the belief, the worldview, which fits this whole of the outer ring of reality, right? Now, there are 3 criteria for evaluating a worldview, and here they are. First of all, logical. Second, we have a literal. And finally, we have livable. Okay? Now, let's get into explaining what each of these criteria are. So, starting with the logical. Is the worldview logical? Do the ideas in the worldview mutually support one another? If it's not logically coherent, then the worldview must be false. This brings the law of non-contradiction into play. Something cannot be both true and not true at the same time. Right? The law of non-contradiction states that contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. Okay, now I'll give you an example. Okay, now the worldview of relativism, and relativism is kind of like a sub-belief of different worldviews, and that's the belief that there is no truth. Okay, all truth is relative. But then we ask, well, is that true? Is it relatively true that all truth is relative, or is that an objective truth about all truth? You can see here that the law of non-contradiction comes into play, and relativism violates that law. You cannot you cannot have objective truth at the same time as only having relative truth. It violates the law of non-contradiction. And Robbie Lashua, he's an apologist, he points out that a worldview, it can't be like a buffet where we just collect our favorite ideas from Christianity. We'll take some of those, but we like some of those ideas from atheism. Oh, what about Islam? I like that idea. I'll take that and form my worldview. No, a worldview cannot be like a buffet, because then our worldviews start to become illogical. They contradict one another, right? Mix and match worldviews do not fit together due to the contradiction. When people say, I believe all religions lead to God, well, no, that cannot be true, because if you believe all religions lead to God and the Christian religion says, no, only Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, but then you believe that Islam leads to God as well that can't be true, because the Christian religion says that it's not true. They contradict one another. The point here is that a worldview must be logical. It cannot have contradictory propositions within them. Which leads us on to our second criteria for evaluating a worldview, and that's, is it literal? Is it factual? Does it reflect reality for the way things really are? And is there evidence that supports the worldview? Now again, I'll give you an example. This is the worldview of naturalism, and this is why naturalism doesn't work. This is because the universe had a beginning, and within the naturalist worldview, they believe the material universe is all that there ever was or all that there ever will be. They don't believe in a creator. They don't believe in something before our physical universe. They can't, otherwise it goes against the naturalist worldview. However, because of our criteria of being literal and having evidence that supports the worldview, we have a massive amount of scientific evidence which shows the universe had a beginning. We can argue scientifically, we can also argue philosophically. Now, very quickly, I'll explain that the second law of thermodynamics, which states that the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, that goes to show that we cannot have been here for an infinite amount of time. The fact that we are running out of energy goes to show there must have been a point at which energy was created at the start, okay? And if that didn't make any sense, go and listen to one of my early podcast, which is about creation and how we can know that there was a creator or a beginning of the universe. And philosophically, we can argue that the universe must have had a beginning as well, because if we talk about infinity, if we've been here for an infinite amount of time, then how do we get to this point right now? And again, I mentioned this in one of my early podcasts, but the point here is that both scientifically and philosophically, we can argue that the universe had a beginning. There is a whole lot of good evidence for it. Therefore, the naturalist worldview doesn't quite work, because it doesn't live up to this criteria of being literal. Now, I want to read a quote from a guy called Richard Lewontin. Okay, now this man, I don't believe he's a Christian, but here's what he said about naturalists or evolutionists. He said, evolutionists have a prior commitment to naturalism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. If that didn't make any sense to you, I'll try to sum it up. Basically, if you believe in naturalism, if that's your worldview, if you have a presupposition and that you assume that this is true, so therefore everything has to fit around it. So if you believe in macroevolution and that we evolved from this first life, which came from stardust or whatever, then because you've got this prior commitment that Richard Lewontin talks about, you cannot actually accept a divine foot in the door. As he says, you can't actually, you will not allow that to be an explanation. No matter how strongly the evidence points towards a supernatural creator, you will never accept that as a conclusion, because you've already made up your mind that that is impossible. And so even when we have unliteral explanations within the worldview of naturalism, like that there had to have been a creator based on all this evidence, they still deny it because it doesn't fit their worldview. So that's our second criteria, literal. Thirdly, and finally, livable. Is our worldview livable? Can I live it out in a way that matches reality? And again, I'll give you an example, this time from the transcendentalism worldview of Hinduism. Now, Hindus believe in Maya, and Maya is the illusion of the physical world. In other words, everything around us, all this physical material world is just an illusion of the true, divine, spiritual world. But if this is really the way things are, why would we eat food, which is a physical thing? If we are just a spirit within this divine, supernatural, spiritual world, then what's the point in eating physical food? I mean, Hindus still eat food, right? I mean, they still understand that it is necessary to eat food to survive. So that doesn't really align with the worldview that everything is spiritual and the material world is an illusion. Why worry about getting hit by a bus when you cross the street? If everything is spiritual, I mean, this is so simple and so basic to most people that there is a physical world and there are real life consequences if we jump off a cliff or get hit by a bus. There is a physical world. And so therefore, Hinduism is not livable. If you're a Hindu and you believe that the material world is an illusion, then why would you live your life in a way in which you still believe in a material world? So therefore, this worldview does not make any sense. What about Buddhism? Buddhism, they have a belief that desire leads to suffering. And we actually talked about this on, I think it was episode 28 or 27, where I talk about how different worldviews respond to suffering. And Buddhism, they believe that desire leads to suffering. In other words, if you have unmet desires, you will suffer. And that's the cause of all suffering. So therefore, you must get rid of desire to get rid of suffering. But then what happens? You have a desire to get rid of desires, and it contradicts. It's not really livable. You cannot actually live in a way in which you have no desires, because no matter what way you look at it, you're going to have a desire because you desire to have no desires. I'm going to stop saying desires, but you guys get the point. It's not a livable worldview. Therefore, it's not a valid worldview. I mean, take naturalism again, for example. Naturalism believes that there is no purpose to our ultimate existence, but they don't live this way, or at least most naturalists don't live this way. I mean, they believe in that we are just cause and effect caused by chemical reactions, and I talked about this in part 1 of Worldviews. Therefore, every action is due to another action, and no one really freely chooses to do anything. Therefore, how can we actually think and use logic and reason if that's just how we are, if that's how we're wired and how we work? And I used the example in the last podcast about how I don't do this, but I slapped someone in the face to try make a point that we do have free will. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Anyway. Now, naturalists, what they will do, despite this belief that everything is cause and effect, they will choose to write books to change our minds about things. But why would we try and convince people if chemical reactions are what guides our thoughts and our logic? If we don't have a free will to freely choose to listen and to change our mind, why write a book if you're a naturalist to try to change people's minds? Why have a discussion to try and change someone's mind if the only thing guiding their thoughts are chemical reactions which have been around since the beginning, well, if there is a beginning anyway within that worldview? Okay, I'll stop on that point for now. And I'll raise this next one. Michael Shermer of The Skeptic magazine, he says this: play hard, work hard, love hard. The bottom line for me is to live life to the fullest in the here and now instead of a hoped for hereafter, and make every day count in some meaningful way and do something, no matter how small it is, to make the world a better place. Man, the amount of contradiction within that. If you're a skeptic, or this guy here, a naturalist, what's the point in playing hard, working hard, loving hard? What is the definition of a fullest life in this life? What makes it full? How do you make every day count? What is the standard of a day counting or not? What does meaningful mean? No matter how small it is, to make the world a better place. Well, how do you make a world a better place where there is no standard for what is better or worse? You cannot actually, as a naturalist, it is not a livable worldview. To be completely consistent with your beliefs, you have to live in a way in which I don't think anyone does actually live. Now, and again, we talked about this in the last episode about worldviews, but when you do start to live out this worldview, there are terrible consequences, which we saw in people like Stalin and Hitler and Mao and Pol Pot, because they concluded within their naturalist worldview there was no morality, therefore they can treat humans how they want, and you get some horrible, horrible, horrible results. So, is naturalism a livable worldview? I would argue not. And again, I've said this before, if you hold one of these worldviews and you want to come and have a discussion with me about this, I would be super, super keen to do that. Reach out to me through the GarrisonPod@gmail.com or on one of my social medias, and I'd love to have a discussion on the podcast as well for more people to listen in, to have one of these discussions. I would absolutely love to. So hit me up if that is you and you are keen. And I want to learn more about what other people believe as well. Okay, so within these umbrella worldviews of theism and transcendentalism and naturalism, which one makes the most sense according to our three criteria? Well, as we've discovered, the transcendentalism worldview that there is no physical world, that's not livable. So therefore that worldview is invalid. The naturalism worldview is not livable either. It's not literal either. It doesn't pass these criteria. So what does that leave? That leaves theism as being the one which passes these criteria. But obviously there are subcategories within theism, and these subcategories are, or these sub-worldviews are Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And those are the three we're going to focus on. I think there's a few more, but they are the major players within theism, okay? Now, they have similarities. Obviously, while they are all theistic religions, and they will have similarities, there are differences as well. And what I want to do is focus on the differences for now. Now, often I speak with Muslims, and they say, well, Nick, we basically believe the same thing. We both believe in Moses and the Torah, and we both believe in God, and we both believe in the special prophet guy called Jesus. Or maybe some people might say, I believe all religions lead to God, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, these are the Abrahamic religions. Maybe they're all just different expressions of reaching God. And there are similarities, but the key is we must focus on the differences. Why? Well, I'll use an example from, again, apologist Robbie Lashua. He points out that if you had two identical white pills in front of you, and one of them was arsenic and one of them was aspirin, you would want to know. If you had a headache and you wanted a painkiller and you had these two identical looking white pills in front of you, you're not going to be going over the similarities. Man, they're both white, they're both round, they're both the same size, therefore it doesn't matter what one I take. No, you want to know the differences. You want to know that one's poison and one's going to help you. I think that's a great analogy from him. And so the two questions which are going to separate the major worldviews within theism, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the two questions which will separate them is, who is Jesus and what did he do? I'll say that again. Who is Jesus and what did he do? And that is where we get differences, okay? So who is Jesus? Either he's the Jewish Messiah or he's not the Jewish Messiah. Okay, now Christianity holds the belief that he is the Jewish Messiah. Judaism does not. Islam does not. So is there evidence? Is it literal and livable and logical that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah? Well, first of all, Christianity believes that he is. Why? Well, first of all, Jesus fulfilled prophecy. Now, we're not going to get into every single prophecy that he fulfilled, but one example I will give you is in Micah 5:2, and this goes to show that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Okay? Now, if Jesus fulfilled this prophecy, this goes to show that he most likely was the Jewish Messiah, because that was prophesied about the Messiah. And we know, due to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was a discovery made of the ancient texts, we know that this prophecy was written before Jesus was born. And when Jesus was born, he fulfilled that prophecy, and this was I think it was 200 years afterwards, okay? Now, this fulfilled prophecy, it meets the requirements of being literal, of having evidence, okay? And Christians also believe that Jesus is God. And Jesus, he proves this, and this is where we get differences, because Judaism and Islam do not believe that he is God. Jesus proves that he is God because he has the power to forgive sins. In the story in Mark chapter 2, verse 1 to 12, Jesus heals someone and he forgives his sin. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they say, Jesus, who are you to say that you can forgive sin? And Jesus goes to show them that he is God, that he does have the authority to forgive sin by proving it then and there by healing someone. A supernatural healing in front of their eyes to prove that he must be God because only God could do that. Therefore, he can forgive sin because only God can forgive sin. Okay, so he proves he's God. He also receives worship, right? I mean, in Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, Jesus says to only worship God. He rebukes Satan. He says, you must only worship God. But then he doesn't rebuke the people who worship him because he is God. He allows himself to be worshipped because he is God. Okay, now Judaism, when it comes to who is Jesus, they don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. They believe he was a person, but they believe he died on the cross and never actually rose again from the dead. They don't believe that he is the Messiah that they are still waiting for, although he's already arrived. Now, a question I'd have for Jews is, why did so many Jews forsake their religion to follow Jesus? Most of the disciples were Jews. Why would they leave this religion where they were living and go and follow this guy? Why did so many people witness the resurrected Jesus and leave this religion of Judaism, realize that he was the Messiah and follow him? Why did they do that all if he didn't actually rise again from the dead? And we have a podcast episode on the Garrison which talks about all or a lot of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I think it's called Did the Resurrection Really Happen? Or is the evidence, the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? That is a past episode in which we go into a lot of depth. And again, in Islam, they believe that Jesus was only a prophet. He's called Isa in the Quran, but they don't believe that he was God. Now, here's the problem with that. Within the Islamic writings in the Quran, this is what it says. This is in Surah chapter 3, verse 3 to 4. He has sent down upon you, O Muhammad, the book in truth, confirming what was before it. And he revealed the Torah and the gospel before as guidance for the people. And he revealed the Quran. In other words, it's saying in the Quran that God had actually, or Allah had sent the Torah and the gospel, or the Bible. And if he's done that, if he's confirmed and sent the Bible, then we should believe the Bible, right? And the Bible which goes to show that Jesus is God. Now they will say, yeah, we believe this, that Allah did send the Torah and the gospel, but the gospel has changed. To which I would reply with the Quran in Surah chapter 5 verse 47, and let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient. Who is it to judge? The people of the gospel. That last part was me. Who is it to judge? The people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient. That comes from Surah 5:47. Also in Surah 6:115, it says, and the word of your Lord has been fulfilled in truth and in justice. Here's the key. None can alter his words. So if Allah has revealed the Torah and the gospel, and this means that as a Muslim, you must agree with the Torah and the gospel, which they will claim that they do. And then later in the Quran, it says none can alter his words. In other words, God is so powerful that no one can change his words. Then how did the gospel get changed? How is it corrupted, as Muslims claim that it is? And finally, in Surah 18, verse 27, it says, and recite, O Muhammad, what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. There is no changer of his words. Well, if there is no changer of his words, then how did the gospel get changed? This is not a literal worldview. It is not logical. It contradicts itself. Islam, if it is fully true and the Quran is fully true, it must be false because it confirms a book which contradicts the Quran itself. It promotes the Bible, yet the Bible contradicts its very own beliefs. Therefore, this is why Islam is not a valid worldview. Now, on to our second question and our final question for the episode. What did Jesus do? This belief that differs between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is also another vital one. Either he died a Roman crucifixion and he rose again from the dead, or he did not. Those are the two options. Christianity, we have the Gospels, we have extra-biblical accounts that from historians such as Tacitus and Josephus and many more that confirm that Jesus did in fact die on the cross. And we have very good evidence and reason to believe that he rose again from the dead, such as, I'll give another quick example because we've covered this on the Garrison before on our Resurrection Pod episode. The disciples, why were they all willing to die and be tortured and live these really tough lives for something that they didn't really see? I believe that the disciples did actually see the resurrected Jesus, so if it really was all made up and Jesus didn't actually rise again on the third day, then why would they go and be willing to live these lives of such pain where they got tortured and beaten and stoned and murdered? Why would they do that all if it was really all made up? Because it wasn't. Okay, Judaism, what do they believe about what Jesus did? Did he really rise again? Or did he really die of a Roman crucifixion? Well, they believe that he died on the cross, but they don't believe that he rose from the dead. And again, we've talked about that before, so we'll get onto Islam, the final one. Islam, what they believe is that someone else died in place of him. They believe that it wasn't actually Jesus who died on the cross, but rather it was a substitute for him. Okay, but does this really match the real world? Is this a literal worldview? Because I think that the evidence strongly suggests, because of these historical writers, who many weren't Christians, they confirm that it was in fact Jesus of Nazareth who died on the cross. In fact, this is one of the most unattested facts in history, that Jesus Christ was a real person and he did in fact die on the cross. And here's where people have the problem, is that he rose again from the dead. Because of course, if you're a naturalist, many naturalist historians will conclude that Jesus did die on the cross, but they have the problem when he rose again from the dead, because that doesn't fit their worldview. So, to conclude our two-parter episodes on worldviews, what worldview makes the most sense of reality? What worldview answers the questions of origin, identity, morality, and purpose the best? What worldview passes our criteria of being logical and literal and livable? What worldview best answers the questions about who is Jesus and what did he do and aligns with reality? Well, I would argue that it is Christianity. Of course, that was expected that I would say that, but that's why I'm a Christian, right? Because it actually makes the most sense of reality. It's the puzzle piece, the middle part, which goes and fits reality the best. It's the middle part of the bagel, which turns it into a burger bun. That's what Christianity is. It makes the most sense of reality. And if this is true, if Christianity is true, the implications are massive. Because within Christianity, we believe in an eternity after we die. We believe in heaven and hell. If Jesus truly did rise from the dead, Christianity is true. And it means that there is a way to be forgiven of our sin. All those times we lied and stole and looked with lust and dishonored our parents and hated people, when we did that, we sinned against God ultimately. And because he's a good and just God, he has to punish sin wherever it's found. That's the bad news for us. That's the bad news for someone like me as well. But the good news, the best news, is that because Jesus died on the cross, he took the punishment for our sin. And he says if we repent of our sin and we put our faith in him, we put our trust in what Jesus did for us on the cross, we accept that gift of eternal life through our faith in him, then we will be saved. That is the best news ever. That is why I'm talking to you right now on this podcast, because I believe it's such good news it has to be spread throughout the whole world. And that is why Christianity is the best and most true worldview out of them all. So I'll finish there. If you guys enjoyed this episode, first of all, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, or if you learned something, please feel free to share this podcast with your friends. Share it on social media or leave a rating. That helps get it to more people. Thank you everybody for listening. I truly do appreciate it. And I welcome anyone to come onto the podcast if you disagree with me. And I'd love to have a discussion with you. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next episode of The Garrison.